last talk will be about debugging. And since we have seen some parts about debugging already, it will be a little bit shorter, and also because here took like 1.5 hours. I think, or I hope you will thank me for that if I make it a little bit shorter. But still with all the content I want to show, of course. So about debugging again. And I hope this is going to work because debugging heavily depends on all the tool windows, but I still want to have this in proper size. So if I'm lost for a second, please don't get too wild at me. Okay, so debugging again. The first thing is F9 is probably one of the most important shortcuts for that, even in Visual Studio already. And maybe you remember if you have some lambda in your method that you're calling, like here with those people. Or first, maybe explaining the sample. Okay, the sample right here is very simple. I have a bunch of person data. So those are all members of the developer advocate team. So there's Martin, Chris, Matt, and Hardy as our boss. And what I do here is just reading that file, converting it into an actual list of persons or of people, better. And now we're going to work with that a little. Every person has data like their name, email, and the company with a certain country. Okay. So the first, like I said, very important is F9 for us. And F9 is basically, now it does work. Well, that's strange. Well, you have seen that before where there was this drop-down, right? Where you can choose where the breakpoint should be placed, but it's not working right now. That's very sad. Let's restart for a second. Maybe I messed something up, but let's see. Okay, Rider night again. Okay, so pressing F9, let's let it load for a second. Okay, F9. Okay, and that's what I wanted to show you. Here we have this little pop-up which allows us to either select the whole statement or just the condition inside that first or default call to place the breakpoint. So in this case, this is executed immediately, so it doesn't make too much sense. But think of a method that you call with just passing a callback that gets called later on. In that case, you could decide to place this breakpoint either there or here, or on both sides, of course. So then there is a very simple method called print people. And we will just place a breakpoint right here and execute that for a second. So as I have shown you earlier, is that readable here, down here? Yeah. We have our variables window with all that information that is also contained in that people list. And so in this case, of course, this is not very helpful. We see here debugging person, and we always have to expand our items to actually see what's inside. So here's one little hint what we can do. So let's go to this person class. And who of you haven't heard about the debugger display attribute? Okay, a few. So this allows you to modify how an object is actually shown inside your debugger tools. So for instance, here we have written, okay, we want to print out the name and the company. And for the company, we're telling the debugger with that string, okay, every company should be shown as the name, comma, and then the country. And so let's just restart that again. And then we will see after expanding that people list that there are all names written along with their company. Okay? And we can, of course, in this case, it's not so difficult to actually find a person, but having the focus right here, we can just start typing to actually find an item. What do you mean, if that feature exists in ReSharper as well? Well, in ReSharper with Visual Studio, I think you still have the other variable watch window. I mean, the native one provided from Visual Studio. This attribute thing also works, of course, in Visual Studio. Yes. There are a bunch of others also included in that system diagnostic namespaces. Maybe it's I think it's worth to take a look. So you can even say that some method calls shouldn't be shown up in the call stack, for instance, if they're just utility methods on strings or I don't know. So there's a bunch of that, yeah. All right. What did I want to show? Okay, yeah. And now, being in that, I forgot. I forgot something. Let's go back to this debug window because I want to make you have the correct expectations. So searching in that window basically works, but only on that part that is actually expanded. So if you go here and, for instance, want to search for some other data that is like, for instance, email, that wouldn't show up until you have that expanded. So it's a very basic text search just on the view that you see. Okay. All right. So let's step through that code a little more. So as long as you're stepping through your code, you always see what has changed and so on. So for instance, this I variable turns orange as soon as it gets incremented. And now let's say at some point we notice, okay, I is 2, but let's go back to 0, restart that loop from the beginning. Then you could go down here, say set value and set 0 again. And with the next call, of course, let's do this again. Then now it gets incremented again because the last statement was executed again, but we set it back to 0. Another option is, like I've shown earlier, I think already, is to say run to statement, jump to statement. This. So in this case, we also can restart that loop from the beginning. And yeah. All right. So let's talk about breakpoints a little more. I have a second call to that print people method right here. And let's say we go to the method that actually prints our person. Now let's say I want to hit that breakpoint only after this call was made. So we can do that by setting a second breakpoint on that call. And now what we're doing is going to the other breakpoint, saying, okay, going to the options. And here in that option dialog, we can say that this breakpoint should be disabled until another breakpoint was hit. Okay, and I hope it's big enough. Well, the content there actually is. Let's make it a little bit bigger here. And as you go through the list of other breakpoints that is provided here for you, you will also get a preview down there in that window. so that you know on which particular breakpoint you're depending on. Okay? So in this case, I say I want this add method first to be executed. Let's confirm that. Let's say done. And now when I debug again, then this first breakpoint is hit. And now if I continue, this print person also is hit several times, like should be like a few times. Actually, it isn't. It's disabled, okay, again, because one thing I didn't notice is disable until breakpoint is hit, and after hit, disable again. This was something that I didn't expect in this case, but we can also choose to just leave it enabled, and in that case, this would be hit like 5 times in summary. So first, second, third, fourth, and 5th time. And even some other times, but that's from other code that follows next. So this print people parallel will come in a second. So what else can we do? We can, for instance, say that this breakpoint should evaluate and also output to debug output certain things, like for instance, people, amount of people is equal to people.count, and you see we also have auto completion here. So let's do people.count and maybe or uncomment this code again. And now we can leave that on. I will disable that. Make one breakpoint here. And so the first was already passed, and in this debug output window, we see down here, there's amount of people is 4. And at the next time, let's continue, its amount of people is 5. So we can do very basic stuff just to get some more information about what has happened in our application. And we don't need to add logging necessarily as a feature with a certain logger or something, but we can do it just by using breakpoints. Okay, of course, we can also let's reuse this example with adding another person. Of course, we can also say, for instance, condition and say people count equals 5. So this should be only be breaking on the second call of print people. Let's execute again. And we see our people have an count of 5, of course. Okay. Also nice, it just shows null in this case. What else? Let's look at some other possibilities we have here. We can also decide to make a breakpoint not suspending. So in this case, it's just used as a reference for another, like I've shown you earlier, with that breakpoint depending on the first. And we could make the first breakpoint, for instance, non-suspending, so that only the second is hit. You can choose to just output the stack trace also to the log console. This one we had remove once hit. I think we also had. No. So for instance, if you have some initialization logic and some other code is depending on that, then you could say this certain breakpoint should be removed as soon as it was hit, and then the rest that you're interested in can be debug properly. Okay, let's go to, let me just, yeah, a few things I forgot. Another thing is, let's say you have a bunch of breakpoints in between, but you really want to execute the code to some other statements. In that case, you don't need to just disable all the breakpoints in between, but you can go just to that certain statement and say force run to cursor, and in that case, all the breakpoints in between will just be skipped. So they will actually be executed, but not be suspended in that case. Of course, this also works with, let's go back here, jump to statement. The non-forceable or the non-force version would be just run to statement, and in that case, you hit all the intermediate breakpoints. Okay, so let's go back inside here. And let's say we have our people, and we are interested in some certain object, for instance, like Mad Alice right here. We could say, or make our life a little easier while continue debugging, we could say we want to select, or let's do this again, make an object ID for that particular object. And here we can make a certain marker, like bug question mark, or maybe without question mark. And then you see red was maybe not the right color, because it doesn't look much different. Let's make it green. And then this object will be highlighted whenever it is used in some other context. So for instance, if we just continue walking through our code, then as soon as this object is used again, and it should be in the next stage, then we have our marker here again, and we will get some visual feedback for that. Okay, object ID I've shown you. Enumerable evaluating, all right, yes. So let's start our application again. And I think I've shown that earlier, but just to make sure, so we can also do, we can just write any expression right here, first or default, and say, okay, company, country equals Czech Republic. Then this should be Martin, because he's the first. And as soon as, maybe let's go back here. Let's do something else. We could add another watch and say person name length, for instance, is 16 in this case. And also, while debugging, you have, at the next attempt, you have the possibility to just refresh that value with the new updated values. Debug again. Okay, ReSharper has this idea of run configurations already, and in Rider it is even there in an improved way, but the issue is here I just don't see it in the presentation mode. So I will quickly move to this this view. So what you can do is you have a bunch of configurations that you can add. And for each configuration, or there's a set of existing pre-configurations that you can use. For instance, executing just a .NET executable or one of your projects. You can decide to run a gulp task or npm scripts and so on. So there's quite a lot of choice here. And in my case, I usually, or what I use so far, is just executing a .NET project, of course. And here you can also, if your project happens to support several target frameworks, then you could also switch target frameworks here. Of course, also the arguments, and very importantly, I think also the environment variables that you want to pass to your debug process. So in case, for instance, you want to pass a secret, then please don't add it to your local environment variables store, but better do it here, which will also not get checked into source control, of course. Okay, let's remove that again. And here, very important, I think, at least for me, because I did that mistake quite often at the beginning, don't fill in values right here under the defaults tab, because this doesn't give you an actual configuration, but just changes the default values. So what you should do is just do the click the plus sign and then select from there. Okay, so what we can do now is maybe I will show you debugging with Chrome. So I have a .NET Framework web application here, and this application has some JavaScript code. Okay, and I already have a configuration for that, which is basically just starting up IIS and building our project before. That one I forgot. So down here you have also some pre-actions that you want to execute for that configuration. So the pre-defined pre-action, so to say, is just building that project that is related to the configuration. But you can also decide to, for instance, run another configuration. So just referencing another one that you previously added. And so let's just do that. And I hope everything is working. So site is running. And now there's the JavaScript debugging. Let's execute that again. And this is what happens if you have the correct Chrome extension installed. Is basically you no longer need to use the development tools inside Chrome to debug and step through your code, but you have this right here inside Rider. And it's basically the whole experience as you have in C#. So you have here a stack trace right here on the left. You can even navigate in that other code that was that is calling from above. You have your local variables. You can modify them. You can see all the global ones. All the global ones and so on. What do you mean, which configuration file? The debug config. You mean the configuration? Yeah. So usually that is unfortunately not working currently on my PC. But usually what should be sufficient is going into that configuration just for starting the web application. And here you should be able to just go to browser and live edit, and then after launch choose default or at best Chrome, and with JavaScript debugger attached. That was unfortunately not working in my case, but it's basically, and I think this JavaScript debug is also just a predefined one. Yeah, right here. So you could add this just from the same dialog. Yeah. It should execute just the same, but for whatever reason, because I'm using a nightly build, this wasn't working today, and this was basically the workaround. All right. And I should also mention that this is currently, or JavaScript debugging is currently only available for Chrome. And since I also had a hard time Googling that before, or I was wondering, better to say, you can just go to the Chrome Web Store and then search for JetBrains, and you should find the JetBrains IDE support. So this is important to be installed, otherwise it won't work. The projector doesn't like Chrome, it seems. Okay, only Rider. Okay, so yeah, debugging works here as well. And of course, in the same way. So you can also have this evaluation and debug output. You can do dependent breakpoints between each other and so on. Conditions, of course. One other thing, and I hope this works, is debugging two applications at the same time. I will try this. I will try this now. So we have this net core web application, which is just responding with hello world to whatever we do. Again, here pressing F9 will give me the opportunity to break either on this whole statement with app.run or just inside the lambda expression. So, and of course, in this case, I want the lambda expression to be suspended as soon as it is hit. And let's remove some of the breakpoints over here and comment some code we don't need. What we need in this case is execute web request, and let's move there. And this is actually just doing download string async from our local server. And we could do breakpoint right here and a breakpoint right there. And what I'm trying to do now is, let's go here to our configurations again. Delete this for a moment. We can also do compound configurations. So compound in that case means that we simply select a bunch of them and they get executed sequentially. So what we want to do is starting the .NET Core web application, and right afterwards the default should be the debugging project, I think. I cannot reorder. Ah, okay. Well, not so bad. Let's see. Unnamed. And so we see the first was hit. So let's continue. And then we're back in our other application and can just continue. And we're back on the client side, so to say. Okay. Any questions so far? Actually, I have no idea in what order it was executed now. I was also a little bit surprised because I expected them to be ordered. Yeah. Let's switch the code from client to server and server to client. Yeah, yeah, that's True. True. Yeah. Maybe in that. Yeah. Yeah. Or maybe set the breakpoint, because if it's waiting for the breakpoint, then the other is running already. Mm. 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 Well, depends on your code. Yeah. I know those are two different dedicated programs right now. Yeah. I Well, one is always waiting on the other, right? Either you execute code and it's waiting for the other to answer. Again, sorry. No, I'm not suspending the server, no. Mhm. You mean while the client is still suspended? Yeah. I think you will just have the other breakpoint suspended as well, and maybe switch to that window where the suspended breakpoint is. Ah, oh. I think one confusion was you have to switch context for them. Yeah. I'm not so sure, to be honest. So we will look into threads again a little later. Uh, but maybe we can just try. We could actually just try that. Let's try. I will just execute that again. And so now we have the case the client is waiting, right? And in the web server, we also have this breakpoint. And now I would just try to do this manually. And so you have the switch and debugger, I think. We have two tabs over here. Yeah, exactly. Problem solved. Yeah, okay, great. Good catch, yeah. So, okay. So basically we can debug two processes at the same time, probably even more. And the same twice. Mm. 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 Yeah, sure, sure. So this is actually really easy compared to, let's say, some other famous IDE, because it's actually the same shortcut. So Control Alt and P, and you can start typing. So for instance, okay, defenv doesn't exist right now, but for instance, VBCS compiler, you just start typing, and then your list of choice gets stringed to that, yeah, filtered, so to say. You also see under which credentials this was started. So in this case, it's my username. And yeah, basically can just attach to any process. Okay, that was debugging two projects. Was there? Yes. I'm not sure if yeah, I know what you mean. I'm not sure if I mixed something, because in ReSharper there exists another feature with attaching after 10 seconds. But let's see. Hmm? It's in progress. Okay. last sign. I hear you. Launch, web build solution. Well, you can basically, I don't think so, no. Because that is bound again to a .NET executable or project and so on. But yeah. Okay, hit counter. Let's look at that again. Breakpoint dependency we had. This one we had. This one we also had. So hit counter, I guess everyone is familiar with that. I don't need to show that. Debugger options are probably interesting as well. And here we probably need the magnifier again. So you can of course say to or disable that the application is focused on if breakpoint was hit. So usually the rider icon is just flashing in that case. You can also say, for instance, that the debug window that we see all the time on the bottom of the screen should be left open after you've finished to debug your application, so after process termination. Scroll to execution or scroll execution pointer to center. So is a little bit maybe takes some time to get accustomed to. So every time you're doing F5 for just continuing, the basically the document is adjusted again so that the current statement is always in the center. One thing, probably also good thing for me, is you can decide how breakpoints are removed. So my setting before was via click, but I can also say to drag it to the editor area. So let's take a look how this looks. So usually I would click to remove it. In this case, click becomes actually disabling the breakpoint, and removing it means you need to hold down your mouse cursor and drag it to the center of the editor. All right. So this makes also sure that if you have some complex stuff going on here, like dependent breakpoints over, I don't know, 10 different breakpoints with certain conditions and so on, then it gets almost or less likely that you delete them by accident. Okay, let's look at those settings a little more. Allow property evaluation and other implicit function calls. So I think the rule of thumb in .NET development is don't throw exceptions inside properties, but of course not all frameworks follow this. I mean, I discover some from time to time, and this makes it difficult, or even deleting something in the property call. Some people also are doing that, and of course this is not what we want, because the debugger usually automatically evaluates all properties, and if some side effect code is executed during that, then debugging becomes even more of an issue. We can also increase or decrease the evaluation time. So the second option right here, ask for location of missing source files. Well, like you've seen, we can step into pretty much all the code we have, we are working with. If it's not there, then it gets decompiled. But if you decide, okay, I know that there are some PDB files lying around, and I want have the actual source code mapping, then you can also decide to getting asked. Bunch of other stuff. Flatten the hierarchy. Well, I think not so important. Okay. Okay, last thing for today is doing something with threads. And we've seen this example. Okay, I need to change this again because I'm just used to it. Or I would probably do it whenever I need it, but not now. Okay, so last example is print people in parallel. And let's see what this method does. We are creating a list of threads in this case. And first just, yeah, actually I see this one is not used, right? Is it used? No, it's not added. Interesting. Threads.add. Interesting though that, yeah, now I remember. That join wasn't working. True, yeah. Okay, so in the first for each loop, we are just creating a thread. And based on the condition whether the name starts with M or not, we're either printing the person with a delay, fixed delay in this case, like 5 seconds, or we're just using print person as before. Okay, we are also setting the name of the thread. So this here belongs to the new thread, new expression. We're setting the name of the thread to the name of the person, just so that it makes it a little bit easier to see in our debug window. And then starting the thread, adding it to the collection, and last but not least, joining all the threads, so making sure that everything was executed. And I will now just set the breakpoint right here and execute that. So since we have 4 threads now, or new spawn threads, we will also see them in our debug window. So there's Chris, Matt, Martin, Hardy, and the main thread from where we started all of them. Then there's also a different view where all the stack traces are shown next to each other. So you could decide to expand the stack trace of Chris and Hardy, and then you see basically the same as you have seen before, but for various threads at the same time. And, well, this is small, and it doesn't get bigger. Okay, but anyways, that's not what I want to show. The last view, so to say, is the parallel stack view, in which case you can see from what thread, or you can see the stack trace of certain threads. So for this stack trace, we can see there are 2 threads, the Martin and the Matt thread. They both have this thread sleep inside. Is it big enough? But this I can even make a little bit bigger without the magnifier. We see the thread sleep here, and it's still sleeping, waiting for printing person. And the other 2 threads for Hardy and Chris are actually already executing that print person method. Question? Oh, okay. And yeah, basically, after we continue debugging here, we also see after the 5 seconds that this window is updated. We see only 2 more threads, so the others are finished with that execution already, and we're done. Okay, I think that was it. Any questions? I think there, you mean for Sublime? For Rider? Okay. That is, I think, for during the initialization, you have two choices. I think that is the bright theme and the dark. The dark is called Darkula, and I'm not sure, but it's the standard one. Yeah, yeah, it's the standard one. So we can Darkula, no theme. It's not. It's obviously not called theme. That's strange. Appearance probably. Darkula and IntelliJ. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe it's contrast of the monitor. Okay. Yeah, changing from monospace to Fira code is always a good idea. Okay, any other questions? Yes. Uh, relation, but yeah, no. I mean, this question is very familiar to me, but as far as I know, it's also nothing that it's worked on that. Well, basically, if you really need that, I would probably go this mile and use this stack trace object and maybe check that. No, as a workaround. I mean, it's not something I wish to work with, but as a workaround, I think it would work. So I didn't understand the first part. Yes, like sets or something. No, no, unfortunately not. What you can do, which I almost forgot, is there's also a category for .NET exception breakpoints. So maybe in some cases this may help because you can, for instance, say, okay, I want a new .NET exception breakpoint, and for a file not found exception that I want to take as a reference, and later on enable some other breakpoint. Yeah, by default it breaks on any exception, and you can also decide whether you want to make this work only for your code or also for called code. Yeah. But putting them inside named sets is a good idea, and this since it was the second time already, someone asked that about uh, comparing the relation of two breakpoints in the stack trace. It would be a nice feature, but I also assume it would be quite difficult. Yeah, because the more the stack trace grows, then you would always need to reanalyze that. And this is a very simple with that depending breakpoints. It's a very simple mechanism, I think. So I hope you all had fun and learned something new that can help you uh, doing things better. I don't know, quicker and more productive. If you have any questions, I think the rest of the team, also of the developer advocates, is very keen to help you. So you can ping on Twitter or email if you have. Uh, my cards are also flying around somewhere. Yeah, I hope you liked it, and thanks for your attention. Ciao, ciao.